And I'm actually very proud to say that MidCoast Council has in fact taken the first step by way of approving the development of a climate change policy and an action plan. And I think it's a great thing, and we should all recognise that. At the same time, I think we all need to contribute to that plan. We all need to echo our views, our concerns, and express them to Council as frequently as we can in order to ensure that we have an effective policy that protects and governs all of our interests, all of our concerns, and the future of the young people who have been intelligent and clever and astute and brilliant enough to stage this event. And I acknowledge that. You heard Kirsty a little earlier, and I would like to recognise and endorse all of her statements, because there are solutions out there. This is not an impossible problem. It is a challenge that we are able and capable to meet and overcome. But we need to work together. We need to ensure that all the vested interests understand that the future of a planet has to go ahead of the almighty dollar. And the single biggest challenge that does face us is that many people still really don't understand the issue. And they fear the issue. It's been politicised, it's been confused by the fear of the economics. And to anybody here who is a climate skeptic, I say to you, it is just prudent and intelligent, even if you don't believe the science, to look at the risk and then look at minimising that risk. Because unquestionably we see massive changes in temperature, we're seeing droughts, we're seeing bushfires, we're seeing a lack of rain. These are issues that need to be considered, planned for, mitigated, and ultimately have a strategy for. I want to throw one statistic at you that a fellow who actually spoke in favour of a climate emergency in Hornsby a couple of days ago told me about. Did you know that there are 96 million barrels of oil consumed each and every single day of the year? That's 96 million 200 litre barrels of oil. If you stretch them, you could stretch them 14,000 kilometres around Australia, and they would be 8 high. So you can't tell me that the use of oil is not impacting on our atmosphere. The data supports it. So to the young people, I want to say, I understand your passion on this issue. I share your frustration at the inaction, and I endorse your concerns. And they are very valid concerns. And as I look around, there are a lot of young people, and there are a lot of people of my vintage. And many of you might remember the great dilemma of the 60s and 70s was to stop war. It was to stop the Vietnam War. And we all fought and we marched, and I remember, and don't do this, students, I used to nick off from school, take my tie off, put a jumper on, catch the train, go off to George Street in Sydney and march in the Vietnam marches to protest against the war. And the fact is we won that, and we have not seen any major wars since that time. We have had some wars, and I acknowledge that, but not to the level of that war or the Korean War or World War II. And the important thing I learned as a young person then, and I ask you young people to think about, is I learned that there are people in these places called Canberra and Sydney and MidCoast who actually make decisions about your life. They actually make important decisions that will influence the direction in terms of where you live, how you live, where you work, what you can earn, and the whole myriad of things. So you as young people need to be informed. You need to understand what is going on. Find out about politics. Look into it. Look into politicians, because these are the people that will determine your future. So become better informed. Some of you here, and in fact I'm really delighted to see many people here who campaigned in 2010, 11 and 12 against coal seam gas. And we managed to win that battle. There was a whole number of you here, and that was a big issue. The Manning Valley was covered with coal seam gas licenses, and we managed to get that taken off. So clearly people power, and what you do can make and will make a difference if we continue in this way. And I want to share one very quick story with you, which is kind of strange, but I think we all can learn lessons from history. And I want to take you back to a fellow by the name of Chairman Mao, who was the paramount leader of China between 1949 and 1972. Dear old Chairman Mao one day woke up, read the newspaper and realized that China could come close to matching the production of steel by Great Britain, at the time regarded as perhaps the leader in world steel production. So he issued a few decrees, and overnight there were furnaces in every suburb spread right across China. And they went around and they collected all this scrap metal and they melted it down, and then they realized we need more wood. So they collected all these little pieces of wood everywhere, and there wasn't enough, so they started chopping down trees. And they started, and because you have to keep these furnaces burning 24/7, they burned masses and hundreds of thousands of trees. We now call this deforestation, of course. Now, once these trees were gone, the insects, the creatures that lived in the forests had nowhere to go. So, of course, they moved to food production areas, to the wheat fields. This in turn caused famines. Famines that resulted in 20 to 30 million people dying. That's the equivalent of the entire Australian population in 3 years, by ill-conceived, ridiculous policies. Now, what is projected here, and why I'm giving you this example, is that at the moment, if there is no action on climate change, in this area alone, it is predicted that our climate will increase by 2 to 4 degrees. This is well above what is being predicted internationally as acceptable. Now, with 2 to 4 degrees, this will affect everything. The number of hot days, the number of cold nights, massive weather events. It will affect your animals. It will affect the use of energy. We will all be wanting to run more air conditioners. Imagine if we've got 20 more days where the weather or the temperature is over 35 degrees. 20 more days. You know, we've just been experiencing a drought situation. So the impacts and the consequences are massive, and they will impact on everything you see, you touch, you feel, you taste, you hear, everything. So we have a climate emergency and we really need to act. And that's why, and I mentioned this a little earlier, several months ago I sponsored a motion for a council to develop a climate change policy and a climate change action plan. And I'm really encouraged that our council has supported that. And please, if you have a chance, speak to a councillor, extend your appreciation to them, encourage them to go forward. Finally, I want to make this last point. You all are consumers. You all have the ability and the capacity to communicate. We live in an electronic age with Facebooks and all sorts of communication mediums. You have the capacity to contact companies. I urge you all to write to companies. Ask them. Put the question very clearly and deliberately. What are you doing about climate change? What are your policies? put the pressure back on businesses. And I know, and I was just speaking to Bruce Robertson a few minutes ago, and he was telling me how corporate companies in Sydney and around the country are really looking seriously at climate change strategies and looking at the issue. But we need people power, we need people to push. Young students, you can write to politicians, you can write to companies, you can organise things that will make a difference. So please continue the momentum, continue the passion. And I leave you with this. In the last between 1950 and 2050, the world's population will quadruple. In 1950, the world population was 2.5 billion. By 2050, it will be 10 billion. Imagine having to feed these people in an environment where global warming is occurring. Imagine these people wanting to have increased living standards. Now, we need action, and we clearly have a climate emergency. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the support. Please maintain the rage.